an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Wizards at War, Chapter 12, Regime Change. In this chapter, the Hesper that everybody is stressing out about having to go track down and convince to talk to them winds up just showing up in the cave in the middle of the night. And the whole conversation is so odd, and I don't know what to expect from it. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Yama for commissioning this episode. So this chapter is really, there's a lot, I think, of like allegory to it, but I am not certain this is what the author intended, and I'm going to go over that stuff, and I'm interested in y'all's like response to my theories here. I'm also not entirely sure how much Diane Duane shares about her writing process and what her intentions are with different stories, because obviously I can't go and find out because it's going to be full of spoilers. And also it doesn't seem like her books are as widely read as they frankly deserve to be. So I don't know if she's like, asked to be on interviews very often where her discussions of symbolism and whatnot in her stories would be like asked about in the first place. Maybe she has a blog or something like that, but anytime that you're publishing your own thoughts, it tends to get less attention than somebody asking you questions for a publication of some kind. So anyway, I'm just curious if you guys have any further information about that. I haven't really looked for anything like that up until now, because in the past, I haven't really cared whether or not something was meant to be a particular allegory. I was willing to just base everything on the merits of the book by itself. But this is something that I kind of would like to know if it's intentional or not. So, with that said, I am going to talk about it later. And we will talk about Nita first. So she comes back to the crossings. And I was not expecting there to be so many centipedes here. They're all over the place, and they're eating all of the debris and destruction and everything. And this is great to me because, we had the ending of that last section with Scarrett being like, we've never been allowed to eat the stuff in here before. And I expected Scarrett to be the only one. And instead, apparently, like, he went and got his entire species and was like, hey, everybody, I got this huge buffet open. Why don't you come by? I enjoy that immensely. Thank you, Scarrett. Unfortunately, though, his ancestor is still MIA. And the one sort of plus side is that it does not seem as if the mercenaries that were hired are like, linked directly to the lone one in any way. It seems like that was just some regular fucking crime, that was just some run-of-the-mill greed and opportunism, and not any particular devious scheme on behalf of what's the other word that they use for the lone power? I can't remember. They have another title for it. The thing is, though, even if it is only just like regular crime, they have been warned that shit's going to get worse as the Puliolus begins to grow stronger. So, there's probably a link of some kind. It's just not as intense as the link for their actual main mission, as it turns out. So, I'm trying to find this spot. I love the fact, too, that Nita, throughout all of this, is still thinking about that haiku. Within every dewdrop, a world of struggle. it was going to take her a while to figure out what that meant. There was something about the structure of it that was puzzling her. That is truly a complete fucking puzzle for me. There are some things, this is one of those that gets me. You guys, I'm sure, have run into this because it's unavoidable, unfortunately. When an author has some sort of riddle built into a story, there are 3 ways it can go. 1, you don't figure it out. They tell you the answer eventually. And you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. That's pretty good. 2, I fucking know the answer. This is really obvious. Why is this character not figuring this out? I can't be the only... It's super obvious, right? Or 3, you can't figure it out. The author tells you the answer. And you're like, wait, what? How does that make... that doesn't even make sense. What? That doesn't mean anything. I have gone through all of those. And the thing about it is you have to decide sometimes if you are the first, if you figure out what the answer is before the character in the book does, you have to decide whether you are willing to believe that you are smarter than the character, or at least that you are educated in the particular way that one would need to be to figure out that kind of riddle in a way that the character would not have been educated. And that isn't always the thing. It doesn't always work. I had a story recently. Somebody sent me as one of the Yuletide book swap books for Unspoiled last year, a Court of Thorns and Roses, I think is what it was called. And it's part of a pretty popular series. It's the first book. And the whole last quarter of it is centered around whether or not this character can figure out this riddle. And it was an instantaneous, obviously the answer is this. And it takes them so long to get to the answer that I just felt angry the whole time. And, it can be distracting. This feels so esoteric that I am not only confident I will not ever figure this out, but that no matter what Diane Duane tells me it means, I will be like, okay, sure. Because it feels so far outside of my understanding or interpretation or the way my mind works that I genuinely am completely at a loss. So I don't know if anybody listening sat with this haiku and tried to puzzle through things, or, if you did and you had any success at all, I'm interested in how that works. But for me, I have just sort of decided to not think about it, to low-key pretend it's nothing, because there is no point. I just don't expect to come anywhere close, and I trust that she will tell me what the answer is eventually, and that is fine. And it may not even be I'm thinking the answer will solve our problems, and it may not be that, but it seems like what's happening is that Nita is being set up with whatever the word is that our friend that we meet later is looking for. So maybe it is pretty important, actually. It all depends. Jacob says she does have a blog and a Tumblr. I'm not sure she talks much about the writing process, but does answer some questions. Okay, Jacob, thank you. Yeah, maybe there aren't many books left in the series, if I'm not mistaken. So maybe eventually I'll ask her, get her to answer some things. So Scarrett comes over. My dad's okay. Oh, no. Scarrett asks Nita if her people are okay. And she says, my dad's okay, but Tom and Carl, they've lost it. Your seniors? Scarrett looked at her in horror. Mover's name. I didn't think it could start happening so soon. Just to check, Nita said. How long have I been gone? Hardly an hour of your time, he said. Oh, I see. You're worried about the irregular transit times. Don't be. I've corrected for them. For the moment, at least. When you transit again, if you lose time, it'll be hours, not days. But you're going to have to keep correcting. Yes, and it's going to get harder. The Polulus is affecting our local space now. You find out anything more about who is behind our little friends, the Taywolf? And this is when we find out it's just, up to law enforcement at this point. And this is when Carmela comes up and is saying, when do we go? And Nita, yet again, is like, well, Carmela, I'm not really sure that you should come. And essentially what this comes down to, and I'm not even sure that this is actually how it would go, but the way that Nita is sort of trying to handle things is like, if Scarrett is able to come with me, then Carmela shouldn't come herself because I don't need the backup. But because Scarrett has to stay and cope with the crossings, that is sort of leaving an opening that Carmela can fill. Now, I say this, I really think even if Scarrett, everything was in hand and he was able to come with Nita, Carmela is coming all along anyway. Nobody's telling Carmela no. Right? Come on. So I think it's just sort of pro forma, but what can you do? And let's see. When she asked about his ancestor, when the aliens took him and my Sibs prisoner in the initial attack, they shoved them all onto a pad and sent them to a portable gate target somewhere in the greater Magellanic. The first storming team that went to that planet looking for them didn't find anything. The target had been dismantled and taken somewhere else, possibly through another gate. The law enforcement people are looking into that too. So Scarrett, he expresses some frustration at letting everybody down. And Nita is like, you can't let the people here down. You're not letting us down. Please don't think of it like that at all. And I really appreciated her framing it like that. Also, it's kind of ironic because Scarrett has been really trying to duck this job his whole life. And now he's being put in a position where there is no choice but to do it. And he actually kind of wants to. Not because he enjoys the work, but it feels crucial right now, So finally, in the meantime, I can gate the two of you back quickly enough. You'll want to warn Ronan that you're incoming. He and his partner know, the Paradexis said in the back of Nita's mind. The One's champion left a stealth routine in place. You can safely direct gate in. They've got it handled, Nita said. All we have to do is go. And this moment is really something for me. Scarrett looks back and says, "It was just a little hut once," Scarrett said. "A little hut outside a cave." "It's a lot more than that now," Nita said. "And it's all yours." Scarrett shivered in a shiny ripple that ran right down his body, and then he poured himself into the heart of the cubicle and up onto its racking, draping himself across the control structures. Guys, look, I have said this before. I really don't want to be as creeped out by the fact that Scarrett is a centipede as I am. I am in a Facebook group called Tips Hat Malegi. And it is all people sharing weird leg-related stuff. Furniture that has odd legs to it. Animals that are sitting in a particular way that their leg is sticking out really glamorously or goofily. And recently, there has been an influx of centipede photos. I just don't think I can stay in the group anymore. Like, I can't handle it, you guys. And I love Scarrett so much, and I just don't want to have this reaction, but holy shit. And like, Carmela is all affectionate, grabbing his eye and tugging on them. And I'm like, oh, you can tug on his eye. Like, no, I can't do it. So, they head out, and I really do enjoy that, like, Carmela gets her gun prepared, and it's just like, you never know what we're going to run into, so we better. Back in the cavern on Rasha, out of their Mokta roofs again, a very confused and troubled group of wizards sat down under the floating spell lights to eat something and try to make sense of what had happened. It doesn't know why we're here, Ronan said, shaking his head. It actually doesn't know. Will we be able to keep it that way? Philip said. If we're careful, maybe, said Kit. It was really strange, Darine said. I'm trying to find the spot. It really did sound as if it was running on automatic. The king may be an avatar of the Lone One, like all its other people, but you know who wasn't completely there. I felt that too, Kit said. But did you feel it sort of sucking at you, trying to make you willing to do whatever it said? I did. And I, said Philippe, all his branches and fronds rustling in a shudder. As did I, Rashawn said. Disgusting. Doubtless that is the source of some of its power over the hive. I wondered that you could find such self-mastery to stare it in the eye and not flinch. Oh, I was flinching all right, Kit said. But sometimes you just have to cope. So, Ponch here just says, I didn't feel anything. There's only one person who can make me do what he says, which is adorable. I found this interesting, though. Their assertion is that the king is an avatar, but the Lone One basically has him running on autopilot and, like, isn't actually consciously there, has just left him with sort of like a list of commands to execute, or like without actual conscious intervention or critical thought. And I find that really comforting because, like, otherwise this was just feeling so dangerous. The fact that he knew they were there. That's not to say that this means that the Lone One doesn't know they're there. It's just that the Lone One is so unconcerned that it has not invested any of its actual attention. And that means it isn't aware of the, like, gravity of what they're attempting to do here. And that, it just makes me feel better. It just makes me feel a little bit safer, you know? So let's see. I can't get past the fact that the king knew what we were and then let us walk away. How come? Perhaps because the situation is exactly as Kit extrapolated it, Rashawn said, and because this is not a complete avatar of the isolate. Possibly the species' rigid structure militates against that, or the Lone One's attention, as Kit also suggested, is elsewhere. Besides which, we have protection. And this is when Ronan's champion interjects. It isn't easy to divert such a creature's attention from the truth of what's going on right in front of it, but it can be done. Still, even with just a partial avatar to deal with, and in my present circumstances, I'm finding it challenging. And this makes Darine a little bit freaked out. The fact that this champion, whom everybody pretty much wants to think of as completely omniscient, of course it can't be, or else they wouldn't be in this position, but it doesn't. This is something that I find really fascinating about people who grew up in cultures that were circulated much more about, like, Judeo-Christian understandings of what God is. We have such a hard time imagining offshoots of God's consciousness or multiple gods or beings that are, like, elevated in any way, not being omniscient. This is just embedded in what our understanding of God is so often that trying to believe, yeah, well, we know some things and we have a lot of power, but we can't just do everything. It's difficult to get how that can be if you're backed by the big kahuna, you know? And even if you know that there are like rules and that they can't just step in and completely solve everything, it can still kind of feel like, what the fuck, guys, do something, you know? And personally, I appreciated that being brought up again later. We'll get to it. But Darene's moment here of just being like, oh my God, this thing is like telling us that it's having a hard time. I felt that panic, you know, same thing. So let's see. Now all we have to do is find out how to make contact with the Hesper, assuming we can get to her without raising the alarm. Spot popped his screen up. I'd been processing the mapping information I stored while we were there and coordinating it with the markings on the tunnel walls. Some of them, rather than being mottos and propaganda, are labels. All of this winds up being irrelevant. I'll say that now. They talk about like this nursery that they think they saw her in, and you know, the mating ritual, and essentially what we find out is that like there's a king male who mates with like a harem of females, and they get impregnated and then are eaten by their young, like eaten from the inside, which is not a hugely uncommon thing with insects. It's incredibly awful sounding to me, but that's why I'm not an insect, I guess. So let's see. You think you can cover for us again when we go back in? The way things are at the moment, I don't see any problem with that, the champion said. Then let's do it in the morning, Darine said. The handmaidens don't go out of the hive with the workers and warriors. There'll be a lot fewer Yaldiv to avoid if we want to have a chat with her. So they go to bed. And there is a moment right before they turn in where Rashawn is talking to Darine. And she says something about, I forget what he said, but when we were talking to your dad, you gave him this really dirty look and your stone changed color. I thought maybe you were getting ready to blast him or something and then blame it on my unhealthy alien influence. Rashawn stared at her. You saw the sunstone do what? It got clear while you were talking to your father. You weren't going to blast him? It wouldn't be that I wasn't in something of two minds, but all the same. And it bothered me that Darine does not pursue this issue. I am beginning to understand more and more that I don't really get Darine's character. Because I just have thought of her as somebody who is curious and wants information. Not really. The more I get to know Darine, the more I realize she thinks she has the information she needs. She operates as if she knows everything already. And so him saying something that, in my opinion, is extremely intriguing. He seems baffled at the fact that the sunstone changed color. It's very clear this is not a common occurrence. She just doesn't seem to be curious about that at all, and I cannot understand it. And this is not the first time that Darine's lack of curiosity has been sort of baffling to me. You know, it's like I want to say, well, she's just a know-it-all, and she's really arrogant. But I'm a know-it-all, and I can be really arrogant, and I still want to fucking know everything, you know? So I just feel like I don't actually understand her the way I thought I did. It's happened too many times for me to feel like it's just, you know, the writing being a little contrived when it needs her to act a certain way. It's been pretty consistent that she doesn't press for details on things. So I have to accept that that's just like who she is actually. So Darine went into Nita's pup tent and got as comfortable as she could. And the next thing she knew, she heard a voice saying from outside, "It does not understand. It does not know." So she sits like bolt upright and is like, what is that? Because it's clearly not a human voice, but it's also like not any of her friends who are not humans. And when she goes outside, there is a Yaldiv walking around the Moktarufs looking at them. And Paunch is standing next to this Yaldiv with his tail wagging, super excited, and has apparently gone and gotten her and led her here. Paunch is wild. I cannot get over him. He's like, he has done this amazing thing that's actually, if anybody wants to be honest about it, incredibly helpful. But all anybody can think about, and I'm not mad at them for this, by the way, is how wrong it could have gone, how dangerous it was for him to do this. And this is one of those things that they always talk about, like, if you take a massive risk and you fail, you're an idiot. If you take a massive risk and you succeed, you're really brave. And that really, like, with Paunch, brave doesn't even feel like the right word, because it seems like he's almost unaware of what the consequences could be. And I know that's not actually true. Paunch is not an idiot. You know, as much as he is a goofball and feels very separate from the experience that everybody else is having sometimes, he isn't lacking in understanding. We have seen him get very grave a few times when talking to Kit about different things. It isn't that he doesn't take things seriously or grasp the, you know, overall scope of whatever they're dealing with. He just has like a totally different attitude about it. And that attitude seems to be, it'll be fine. Like, that just seems like how he approaches it is, I mean, we needed the Hesper. I got the Hesper. I told you I could do that. It's fine. We're going to be fine. And that is an energy that I just really wish I could carry with me more. I just, you know, that seems like a good way to live. I'm just saying. So let's see. Kit asks whether or not, asks the champion, do you think that the king noticed that Paunch brought her here? And the champion is like, I don't think so, because I would have noticed, and Paunch seems to travel in a way that doesn't register. So I don't think that they noticed either. And Paunch is a little bit irritated, is like, I did a great thing. Why are you guys being weird about it? It's fine. I do understand that. So Dareen turns her attention to the Yaldiv handmaiden. She came around the back of the Moktarufs and paused to look at the members of the group one after another, taking them in. A tree with glowing berries, a tall humanoid with flowing blonde hair, etc., etc. Somebody really ought to say hello to her, Dareen said. And they're standing there trying to figure out what to say. And the Yaldiv raises its foreclaws and tries to do the, like, greeting that it has done before. And it's like sort of in the middle of it when it realizes, it seems like that's not really appropriate for this. And then they just sort of let their claws fall. This one saw these when they walked in the tunnel near Grubbery 14. Though they were not Yaldiv, they had a Yaldiv seeming. They wore it strangely, like a shell during molt, but not like, as if the shell could be seen through. Their shapes were strange. Their shapes were these shapes. But this one saw that one before, she said to Dareen, and not within the Cormorantcy. So this is when Dareen says that she, saw her not long ago from within that one. And they kind of go back and forth with this weird, is it pronouns? Yeah, pronouns. And there comes a point where Dareen begins to suggest that she have a name. And I'm going to get to this in a second. Very slowly, Yaldiv lowered herself to the floor, folding her legs underneath her and resting the huge claws on the floor at what passed for their elbow joints. And Spot is like sort of monitoring her heart rate, the equivalent of her heart rate, to be able to tell how she's taking information, how frightened she is, how excited she is, which winds up being pretty helpful. Tell these of this one's life. This one is a Yalda. The Yalda are the mothers of our people. We are the engenderers of our city's defense. To be a Yalda is our destiny and our glory. And I love this bit. Dareen says, oh, destiny. Half the time, the word's just code for what someone else wants you to do without asking any inconvenient questions. Which, oof, that is fucking true, Dareen. Yeah, you got to the heart of that. So she says that she feeds meat to the newly hatched grubs, cleans up, etc. And she says they tend the hatchlings until they're large and strong enough to be taken away and trained in their work, or the way of warriors, or vessels. Vessels was a different word in the Yaldiv language than the simple female form. And the it pronoun simply meant that the creature using it was just a thing, of no value except as it contributed to the glory of the Great One. Ew. Nope, don't like that. So, at this point, the Yaldiv is like, so tell me what y'all's deal is, because you snuck in. And she is like, you managed to mimic a lot of things, but you are here in your regular forms now, so what's going on? And essentially, Dareen is just like, well, we didn't want to completely freak you out. And the Yaldiv unexpectedly says, the strangeness does not frighten this one. It is also, she stopped, also not the same. And it took me a moment to understand that what she meant was she is not the same as the other Yaldiv. She clearly feels like separate and different and strange. There is every reason to fear, for when one says the wrong word, the dangerous word in the wrong hearing, little time passes between the last breath and the first bite of another's jaws on the meat that was one's body. And this is when Dareen is like, all right, we have to stop with this one, that one thing, because it's getting confusing. We need to give you a name. There is something, Ronan said suddenly, called a name. The Yaldiv looked from him back to Dareen. A name? A name, said the one inside Ronan, is the word by which one calls a creature that is different from all other creatures. A creature that is its own unique self. Though as far as mere sound went, there was no difference between Ronan's voice and his guest's, the Yaldiv started up, terribly shocked. She wheeled swiftly to stare at Ronan and began to back away. Bumping into one of the Moktaroof stopped her, but still she stared. This one also it knows. This voice, it is death to hear this voice, this word from beyond the outside. It is worse than death. She was shivering and began to crouch down again. Desperate supplication. There is no such place as the outside, nothing but the city and the one who rules it. Let the Great One forgive this unworthy one. It did not mean to speak the evil word. It will be faithful to the Great One's trust. This is so excruciating. I felt so bad. She's so terrified here, and it's just really sad. I hate this. So Ponch comes over and he just begins to lick her claws to calm her down. And wildly, it actually works. She begins to settle down. And she looks between Punch and Darine and is like, y'all really are not alike. Like, what's the deal? And this is when Punch says that Punch is his name. And he does a demonstration of, it's great to have a name because then people can call you to give you treats, which honestly is a pretty compelling argument as far as I am concerned. And I love this bit. It's just all an excuse for him to get a treat as well. However, he doesn't eat it. He brings it over for her to have, which is adorable and huge sacrifice on his part. So this one supposes if there is no harm, then there might be a name. They say it is unworthy of notice. They say it is always the last one to be called. Was that a touch of bitterness? The last one, Darien thought. She glanced down at Spot, who was still running analyses. He showed her a word in both the speech and the Yaldiv written language. Memeki, Darien said. The dark eyes met hers again. The last, she agreed. It would not be a strange calling. So, something that I want, I hinted earlier about feeling like there is more going on here than just this story. What this feels very much like to me, and we will get further into this conversation, so we'll talk about that a little bit more. First of all, parallels to her situation and Mary, because there's just so much about this that feels like Mary being singled out. You know, if you're going with the old story of Gabriel came down, informed Mary she was going to have God's child, and she was impregnated but was still a virgin, and nobody believed her. And she had to convince her betrothed that that was the situation. And how terrified she was and flying in the face of tradition and what was acceptable. Risking her life, really, honestly, in every way. Risking her life socially because they could have stoned her to death. Risking her life in giving birth because that's extremely dangerous. And the fact that Mary is often called the handmaid of the Lord, and this creature is a handmaid within the structure of this. And her name, Memeki, I was interested to see the etymology of this word. So there isn't an exact meaning that I was able to find. There is a Japanese word that's close that means earthworm. And yet there is also a couple of different things that are weirdly. So there's memek, which is apparently an Indonesian vulgar slang that is essentially the same as pussy, which I am going to assume was not meant to be associated with this. There is meki, which is a Japanese word that means a word that comes after a woman's name or a child, age, order, which I found sort of interesting because of the fact that she says, I'm supposed to be the one that comes last. I don't know if that's purposeful or not, but let's see. Another strangeness. This word also you has heard, and Darien has to be no. When it speaks of itself, it has a name. It says I. When you speak to somebody else, you. speaking as a group, we. And she picks up on this pretty quick. This is not an easy thing, like a completely new concept, really. This one is afraid. It knows this word. It never thought anyone else might. Tell how you know the word. Slowly, Mimiki made that pulp grooming gesture again, like pushing hair aside. Often it wished, when it was younger, that it could achieve some merit as some of the Yaldat had. But to serve the Great One personally is not an honor offered to many. And those Yaldat who had achieved such merit, they said it could never happen to this one, for this one was not fair enough to ever attract the king's attention. This one came to believe them, and stopped hoping for more. It was content to serve in the grubbery, giving the young ones food in less meritorious ways. Such was honor enough. Yet there came a night when the city was closed as always, and this one rested, as all rest, when Sek is not in the sky. And in the time of rest, this one heard a voice. The voice was like the second voice that you used to speak just now. She looked again at Ronan, and once again that tremor started to shake her limbs. It came from everywhere and nowhere. It used the words you use, that this one had never heard before. It said you. You can be far more than this. You can bring your people out of this place, this life, to something far greater. Will you do it? This one did not know what to answer, but the voice that whispered in the night said, "The ones who will show you the way will come. They will not be like you. When they come, listen to what they say. One will say the word you need to hear." The voice made this one frightened. So many forbidden words. This one went through the next day in terror, thinking that those words might force their way out, for they were strong and clamored to be spoken. They shouted night and day inside this one until it thought that death was close to it. But nothing happened. Then, without warning, came the day when what had until then seemed impossible nonetheless did happen. The Great One honored it. Everything was changed. And the rest of the Yaldat said, "See how merciful the Great One is, even to such a one whom all thought would be the last to be chosen, if it ever happened at all." This one became honored even among workers and warriors. All of those said, "Here comes another of those who defend us from the evil others, the mighty ones, the weapons in the Great One's claw." Mimiki lifted her claws in a gesture more like the one that the warriors had used to greet one another. "But it was too late," she said, dropping her claws again. The words of the voice that spoke in the night, and were now inside this one, began to grow as swiftly as the Great One's favor had, and even the mighty honor the Great One had bestowed on it began to mean little, almost nothing. It began to think that it was... Mimiki paused, then said in a rush, that it was no one's weapon, that it was for much more than that, that it was... Her voice dropped, like that of someone whispering heresy. That it was itself, that it was an I, and that I was for something else entirely. And now comes strangeness, yet more strangeness. The eyes that I have seen, which are not Yaldiv, and the voice that I know, the one I heard whispering in the night and that no one else could hear. And she goes over to Ronan and calls him Hod the Splendid, and the champion is like, "Excuse? How do you know that name?" "Before, I didn't know what a name was. Now I know. That word was something the voice whispered to me in the night. Are these, then, also your names? Regent of the sun, ruler of the third day and the fourth heaven, avenger of the luminaries, guardian of the divided name, messenger of messengers, chief prince of the presence, winged like the emerald, the providencer, the creature with those names is within me. We'd say, those are my names." I thought so. So now I ask you, what comes next? For my people's sake, I must know. What is the word that must be heard? What must I do to become what the voice says I must? Ronan sat there looking stunned. I don't know, the defender said through him, and he looked helplessly at the wizards around him. There were other words still. The voice said, You are the Aeon of light, you are the Hesper, you must find the way. But without the words spoken, there is no path, only darkness. Until it speaks itself, only the abyss. And finally, Doreen is like, look, we're going to help, but we don't know the answers to this stuff. So you're going to have to be patient and give us some time to figure it out. And Ronan is like, yeah, it might take a while. Memiki settled down. I will wait, she said. Then she looked up. The way we came out of the city, I can go back that same way before morning. No one will know? Paunch says he can take her. Nobody will know. And then continues, I can rest here meanwhile. I'm tired. This has been a day full of strangeness. Not just for you, Doreen said. Rest. Nothing will happen to you here. We'll take care of you. The strange eyes dwelled on her. Yes, Memeki said. You will. A tremor went through Doreen. The voice had sounded exactly the way Ronan's voice did when the One's champion used it. After a moment or two, Memeki started to lean a little to one side. And she has just, basically fallen into a hibernation state. She's fallen so hard asleep. So, this thing, the Hesper, I looked up what Hesper means, and it basically is like a star of the evening. And, the name for Lucifer had been Star of the Morning, if I'm not mistaken. So I guess that makes sense because what they're saying is on the horizon, on the horizon is a bright version of the Lone One that never fell. Again, it feels like the coming of Christ kind of thing. And our merry band are, part of the signals, the wise men that show up. But what's interesting is that, I can't tell if the Hesper is going to be a physical being or if it's going to be more of the Lone One is sort of, it can take physical form, but it's sort of conceptual. If you know what I mean? I don't really know how to say this. It can be so many places and manifest so many different ways. Is that what this being is going to be more like? Is it going to be that kind of flexible? Or will it be kind of grounded on this planet, or just not necessarily specifically this planet, probably able to leave? But you get what I mean? Is there just going to be the one? Because when we think about what, I keep wanting to make the comparison to Memeki and Mary, and especially being seen as a vessel and nothing more than that. That is such a common treatment of Mary. It's an interesting thing to me, the difference in various branches of Christianity and the way they approach Mary as a person. If you look at Catholicism, Mary is revered to a degree that puts her almost equal to Christ. Imagery of her is everywhere. Prayers to her are extremely prevalent. And yet you go to other religions and she's practically a non-factor. She gave birth to Christ. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Job is over. Moving on. And it always really bothered me as a kid that this woman went through so much and risked so much without really, it feels like, being given that much of a choice. And that's not to say she wasn't given a choice, but you know what I mean? It feels when somebody a fucking angel lands in your bedroom and is like, hey, so God wants to knock you up. You good with that? How many people are just going to be like, Absolutely not. Most people, when they're told, well, this is for the good of the universe and to bring peace to Earth, which didn't work, BT dubs, most of us probably would want to believe that thing. I'm just really wondering how much the, bits of alignment that I'm seeing mean anything, and how much of this is just pure original story. How much can you write about the coming of a being of such goodness and light without accidentally bumping up against, a Christ allegory? I mean, it feels like it would just happen, whether you intended it or not. It's kind of hard to avoid. So, yeah, that just keeps kind of coming up for me. Is this something that she's trying to do? Is it something she's actively trying not to do? Or is it something that she was like, well, it's going to happen, but it's not really my aim, but I'm not shying away from it either. If it's part of the story, then that's what it's going to be. And Memeki being coming to realize that she is herself is really fascinating to me, because it feels like such an extreme manifestation of a woman coming to realize that she can do more, that I almost hesitate to make that comparison, but I can't help but do it simply because I know I was born into a world where women were given a lot more freedoms than in many places. And even so, I mentally limited myself to a degree automatically because I just inherited misogyny. That just happens. It's part of our culture. And didn't realize that I had done it until I got much older. I mean, that story that people always use where a boy and his father get in a car wreck, and the boy is about to get surgery from the doctor, and the doctor says, I can't do this because this is my son. And they're like, who was the doctor? And the bit is supposed to be, people don't even think about it being his mother because it is so accepted that doctors are male. I completely fell for that shit. I must have been 15 when somebody first posed that to me. And I was like, I don't know. Who was the doctor? And they were like, his mother. And I swear to God, that more than anything blew my mind in terms of me coming to realize what my inherent biases were. The fact that I was brought up in a household with a very feminist mother who was a goddess worshipping Wiccan. And I still didn't think, oh, the doctor's a woman. It just didn't fucking occur to me. And even today, this very day, I was listening to a podcast where they were talking about a movie in which there is a thief who gets caught and imprisoned, and they keep saying the thief, and I just, male. And eventually they were like, so the thief, she went, and I stopped and was like, holy shit, man. I have just been assuming it's a dude this entire time. And I just still fall into that. In a culture like the one that Mary would have been brought up in, being seen as a vessel was literally the entire job of a woman. You were meant to be the means by which a bloodline was carried forward, and you were meant to nurture that bloodline, and that was it. You were not meant to have your own goals. You were not meant to be the head of a family that makes any sorts of major decisions in any way, or hold positions of power in a government. None of that. You were a housekeeper and an incubator, and those were what you were. And while we know women were much more than that, actually, they just had to be very sneaky about it, I can't help but think, a woman being approached by an angel and being told, like, you can have a major hand in the changing of this entire world, that would have quite an effect on somebody who has been told they don't really perform any other function. And it's kind of a shame that it was still bearing a child. You know, like, it couldn't be that Mary was like the badass one. Some people say it kind of was, actually. But this whole shift in thought that Memeki has to go through in realizing, like, I am a separate being who can make my own choices. That's a massive shift that is probably really scary when it seems like that's actively dangerous to believe. And I'm really interested in whether Memeki is like this word to bring about the Hesper. Will the Hesper live within Memeki? Or, like I was asking earlier, will it be a being that she, like, births? If it is and it eats its way out of her, I will quit. Just saying that right now. Just saying that right now. But I am so curious where this is going, because there are so many parallels, and yet it isn't at all. It could just be complete coincidence and me wanting to read into things because having been brought up on all of this biblical shit from my dad, I just can't help but overlay that onto things that I'm reading of this nature. I will admit, I have some biases in that way. So let's see. Doreen, when she goes to sleep, Doreen starts talking to Ronan. And Ronan says, like, the champion already said he doesn't know what to do. Yeah, right. And a lot of help you are. And he's like, what, me? And she says, no, him, the defender. We're not omniscient, the one's champion said, sounding annoyed. Oh, sure, you're not. Just immortal and incredibly powerful, which doesn't do us much good if after all this running around you can't give us a clearer sense of what we're supposed to do. Ronan frowned and looked over at Kit. What is it with these Callahan women that they're always after yelling at you and giving you grief? Not always, Kit said, sounding resigned. Just when it's going to get most on your nerves. We yell at you because you're hopeless, Doreen said. But I guess it's not your fault this time. And where did all these other names come from all of a sudden? I'd have thought you'd had enough already, just in our own mythologies. We pick them up in our travels, the champion said with a weary and resigned look. It's an occupational hazard. And this is when Kit says, one of those was a little weird. Guardian of the divided name? Ronan nodded. The one's full name. Rashawn looked perplexed. Why would that need guarding? It doesn't, the champion said. You do. From it. But the one is on our side, I would have thought, Philip said. Or we are on its? That's not the point, the champion said. You can't really have any sense of how much raw power is tied up in the one. Physicality can't express it. Nothing can express it. It's not meant to be expressed. It's meant to be. If the one wasn't careful about how it manifests itself inside space and time, everything would all just dissolve. So that even the one's name in the speech has to be divided up to keep it safe like a critical mass? That's right, said the champion. The name of names has so much primacy of power over mere created matter that it could change or wipe out whole universes if irresponsibly used. So the names are leaked into creation only in fragmented form. A little bit here, a little bit there. Even names in less central levels of creation get divided up that way. Well, even if the one's names are so powerful, why do we have to be running around all the time and cleaning up the messes all over the universe? Why doesn't it just get its butt here and take care of things? This got to me. Behind Ronan's eyes, The champion looked surprised. What fun would that be? For it? For us, the champion said, sounding as if he was surprised Darine didn't get it. She stared at him. And that's it. That's the end of that, part of the conversation. Which, again, I was so mad. What fun would that be? Sir, I don't know how to tell you this, but it's not super fun watching the seniors lose all of their magic and your family's dissolving into hopelessness as the world begins to fall apart around them. I'm just saying, y'all are fucked up. Yo, you're fucked up. There it is. Until she fully becomes the Hesper and achieves whatever her full power may be, there's no hope that she can do anything about the threat to the rest of our universes, said Philippe. I have no immediate answers, the champion said. She's still only in the middle stages of embodiment. Such a process has to proceed at its own pace. And essentially saying we have to be hands off and let this happen, which is the exact opposite of what Darine wants to hear, which I do not blame her for at all. There is nothing worse than being in the midst of a crisis and having to wait for the next stage to happen because you can't do anything about it. It's out of your hands completely. Not having control when you're freaking out, worst feeling. Sucks. I don't blame her for this at all. So Ronan starts talking about his experience coming to terms with the champion being inside him. He says that when he found out what was happening, he hated it. And that Memeki seems to have gotten past that part because probably they have different psychologies, which does make sense. She's been used to being part of a hive mind. Not even necessarily a hive mind, because that would suggest that they could hear what she's thinking. But a forced homogeny. And so sharing part of her consciousness with this other being might not feel so invasive because she's used to being forced to be share always with everyone. Whereas most human beings are not socialized that way, and it would feel like a lot more of a violation. So I guess it makes sense that she would be more open to that. And he then says, however, her people's lifestyle seems to revolve around doing what you're told. How fast can she get past that? Can she ever get past it? So at this point, Kit yawns and they're all just all right, I guess we better go back to bed. Darine says, I guess we'll have to just take her back and wait for something to turn up. And I love it. I think it's Kit who says, wait. And Darine says, something always turns up. And it's funny. She went from being I can't believe that we just have to sit here, to then having quite a bit of faith, actually, that eventually we'll be given the next step. And that is one of those things that when you begin to have your freak out that you're not in control, the only way to counterbalance that is to have faith that things are going to work out. And it's so hard. Guys, I won't get into it too much because I'm at the end of this episode, but I went through a complete crisis, the day after my wedding, right before we went on our honeymoon. One of the most stressful days of my entire life. No joke. And a huge we missed the first day of our honeymoon, and I won't get into what happened, but it was completely out of our hands. And I had done everything right, and it didn't matter. Shit just worked out in such a way that we missed our first day and were stuck in an airport hotel room. And I laid awake that night, absolutely torn up with anxiety and disappointment, because we were still operating without guarantee we would get to go on our honeymoon at all. And I had done absolutely everything within my power to ensure it happened. And my heart rate was up. I was like, Owen was asleep. And I was just laying there staring at the ceiling, absolutely freaking out to the point where I was like probably close to a panic attack. And I suddenly had this moment of, if it'll happen, it'll happen. You have done absolutely everything you can. Very literally, there is no more step to be taken. It is out of your hands, and you have to trust that it will work out. And it was this weird thing that it felt like it came from outside of me. Like there was a being watching and going, oh, sweetie, you have got to calm down. This is not good for you. And because, trying to tell yourself it's out of my hands, I just need to calm down, that fucking very rarely works. And it was just, for some reason, I became overwhelmed with this like faith. Yeah, it'll work out. Something always works out. And it was like this moment where Darine is just like, we just have to wait for the next thing that helps to show up. And that was actually what happened. The next day, things fell into place. And it really did not look like they would. Truly didn't that night. It's just sometimes you just have to step back and trust that the universe is like not going to completely screw you. And it sucks because sometimes the universe will completely screw you. You can't completely bank on that. That's why I guess it's faith, because it's not absolutely guaranteed that bad things won't happen to you. But anyway, Ronan agrees to keep watch, and Darine has a moment with Spot, and he starts talking about how his people installed a great deal of new software that it's been trying to like come to grips with and dealing with patches. And Spot says the problem seems to have been that the messages from the power simply had too much content embedded. I wasn't able to process them correctly, so they were coming out truncated. But with the patches, I'm now able to perceive more clearly exactly what it is the powers and the manual functions are trying to tell me. As a result, I've been able to analyze the present situation more accurately. We're missing something, both in terms of something we don't know and something that's not here, something we urgently need. A variable is missing. Nita, Darine said, and let out a breath. I think so. Her presence here has become vital. Whatever she went back to Earth to obtain, we've got to have it here very soon or fail. If she doesn't have whatever it is, then there is no and. And that is the end of the chapter. So yeah, I mean, I hope it's that fucking haiku. And if it is, I don't know how. I don't know what that matters. But there it is. So I'm going to wrap up, but thank you again very much to Yama for commissioning this episode. Thank you to all of you for listening. I hope you're enjoying the coverage. And I will be seeing you soon with a new episode. Until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.